Ladies and gentlemen, we are live from the Isle of Man in the UK. This is Jon and Mike's MMA Corner.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to look back at UFC 199 and some other little bits. So I have got another Jon joining me. He is a man who has been shining information on the UFC scene. He's been dropping odds for fights. He's part of the Anik and Florian podcast, which is absolutely awesome. I'm sure many of you listen to it. I have Jon Anik joining me. Sir, thank you so much for this anyway. Thank you so much for some of your time to come on and chat.
My pleasure, Jon. Absolutely, man. Good to talk to you, and thanks for having me on.
Now, like I said, we're going to look at 199. There was a lot happening. I'm still not in shock, but just in awe of how awesome the card was, because I think a lot of people, when they saw the schedule, everyone kind of thought 199 will get looked over because everyone will be anticipating UFC 200, and I think 199, I think it blew everyone out the park. The way the fights went, the results went, as a whole, I give it an A-star. It was just top draw.
I mean, my memory's not great, but this is one of the better fight cards, top to bottom, that I've ever seen. And just knockout after knockout, and not even TKOs, right? I mean, just guys getting knocked out cold. And then, of course, Michael Bisping puts a capstone on the entire night and his career, stamping his ticket to the Hall of Fame, becoming the UFC middleweight champion. I have a personal relationship with Mike, having worked with him over the years. And, of course, MMA Live, the show that I first did, was on ESPN UK before it was ever on TV in the States. So I've always sort of had a special connection, I feel, with the UK fan base and Bisping in particular, and to see him break through against a guy in Luke Rockhold who is one of the best, most well-rounded mixed martial arts fighters I have ever seen. Just an incredible moment, and I don't know where it stacks up in terms of the biggest upsets in UFC history in terms of the odds and everything else, but about as improbable as it gets. 17 days notice to beat a fighter of that caliber, and just couldn't be happy for Mike, man. UFC middleweight champion. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and Dave Scholler just recently tweeted about they're arranging like a victory parade for him and stuff, so I like that that's happening. I think it'll, shine a bit more light in the UK scene, because UK media, I've been keeping an eye on it. They weren't too quick jumping on all this. I think it's silly. I think it's ridiculous, only because it's not Conor McGregor. Because it's not Conor McGregor running his mouth. And I think, guys, Michael Bisping's the reason Conor McGregor is doing so well. He catapulted the European scene. Like, I know Bas Rutten was the first European. Actually, Bas Rutten and Arlovski were the first two guys to win UFC titles in Europe, but Bisping has been a mainstay, and yeah, it was incredible. The fight, the card, holy shit, what an insane card. Reyes versus Kim. I've seen two guys who just put it all on the line. That fight kicked off the whole card, and that was fight of the night, and deservedly so. I was happy they got that bonus, because it could have easily got overlooked from all the chaos that happened prior.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the biggest joys for me in my job as UFC commentator and just as a UFC fan is seeing guys who are on the first fight of the card, or guys who maybe are making 10 and 10 and aren't making a lot of money to get that bonus money. And obviously for those guys to still win a bonus, given how good this fight card was, they go back to the locker room, there are 24 more fighters who are going to make that walk. And there were so many individual efforts that I thought were worthy of bonuses, but I thought for sure that it was nice to see that fight of the night for those two guys hold up. Just an unbelievable fight card, top to bottom. And, one thing I do want to say on Bisping, really for any audience, I've been saying it in the States in all the interviews I've done since, is just he's a little bit misunderstood, and you could probably speak more to how he's perceived and received in the United Kingdom, in England, wherever, but it seems to me like he's not as popular as he should be, and part of what he does is to sell fights. I mean, certainly he can do it like the best of them, but I really believe there's a good man in there and a good family man in there, and the impression that he made on my twin brother when he met him after a fight in Vegas was pretty unbelievable. So I hope, to your point, that the embrace becomes bigger in the UK and the coverage becomes bigger. I don't know what else we need to do to put this guy on a pedestal, but he certainly deserves every accolade, and every word that's come his way since Saturday night.
Oh, more than people can really imagine. I had him on the podcast when he was actually having that grappling match with Chael Sonnen.
Yeah.
And I had him on, and he thought, obviously, when I called him up, he thought the recording was going on, And I said, no, Mike, don't worry about it. There's no recording going on. You don't have to do the whole, the kind of interview style conversation set, because I had the off-air conversation with him. And off-air, he's fantastic. I've met him a couple of times. I met him in Manchester when he was Men Are Fighting in Manchester. And I met him in Glasgow as well. And, when he's not... He's like Conor McGregor. When the cameras aren't around these guys, do you know what? They're just normal, regular, top guys. Yeah. Off camera, Conor McGregor as well. I've met him a couple of times off air, away from any cameras, and he's just a lovely guy, just a great guy to talk to.
I just feel like McGregor is far more beloved for whatever reason. I don't know if that's accurate.
Yeah, he probably is. I think with Bisping, it's the way he comes off. Again, like you said, he sells tickets, and that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to be he's trying to sell, but people think that's who he is and what he is. I think with America, the problem we had with America was it was the Ultimate Fighter, where Hendo and him.
Yeah.
Everyone, I'm not being funny. I'm English. Not English. I'll rephrase that. Whoa, backtrack. I'm from the UK. I'm Manx. I'm from the Isle of Man. I'm proud and Manx, but. Henderson, I'm backing Henderson because I love that man. When I grow up, I want to be Dan Henderson. He's a great man. And bloody hell, let's talk about Dan Henderson quickly. Wow.
Oh, I don't even know what to say, man. 45 years old, and I think in this fight, he proved to me and anyone else who had been a naysayer at any point in time that there is still fight left in him, because he had to deal with major adversity. He had to grapple. I mean, there were times he was out-grappling Hector Lombard, a scenario that I never thought would happen. And certainly, we know what Hendo's wrestling pedigree is, but Hector Lombard, even though he's got a lot of miles on the tank, is still 7 years younger and was presumed to be the fresher fighter going in there. Really a turn-back-the-clock type of performance for Dan Henderson. I think it'd be the perfect way to go out. I'm not sure with a payday well north of $500,000 that he is going to walk away right now, but few guys get to go out like that. We remember what Chris Lytle was able to do in his final UFC start. So I'd like to see Hendo walk away, but I'm never in the business of retiring fighters, and after seeing that performance, if he wants to make that walk once or twice more, I'm certainly not going to say anything to get in his way. I think he's earned that at the very least.
Yeah, you can't say anything after that performance. It's crazy, but I'm like you. I think just go out. You've just done it. You've got the perfect way to finish, and the paycheck's a killer. But at the same time, Dan Henderson's that fighter. It's in him. He'll find it hard to step away. Like all guys, like GSP, even he gets that itch. It's that itch that they got to fight, and I think. For Henderson, I would love for him to finish like this. Great, go out on top. Absolutely spectacular. Like literally, I thought Hector Lombard was dead on the ground. Like, oh my, when he finished, he threw that elbow at the end on the ground on top of him as well. I went, oh my word, that's even stronger than Bisping's KO.
Oh, I know it. No, it was a little bit hard to watch that final shot, and it was nice to see. I don't know if the cameras picked it up on your feed, but Hector Lombard was able to get up under his own power and go over and congratulate Dan Henderson. But it's just incredible with Hendo, because when I think about some of the past fights of his and fights that I've called, not a lot of people were giving him a chance going up against Tim Bosch, which was actually a year and a day ago as we speak here today, and won that fight. And then obviously the Vitor fight, which I called last November, was a little bit of a disaster for him. And I just wasn't convinced, and nor were the odds makers, I think, that Hendo could come back and beat a guy like Hector Lombard, who was moving back to middleweight and presumably stronger and not cutting the weight. And lo and behold, man, never count out an all-time great.
Someone who stepped in on short notice as well, who probably doesn't get the accolades he should be, with one of the most entertaining performances of the night. It went to a decision. Alex Caceres beating Cole Miller. So Cole Miller steps in short notice. And then Alex steps in short nose, and Alex, I haven't seen him like that for a long time. That was his best performance, let's say it, because he was absolutely entertaining from start to finish.
Alex Caceres is a good fighter, man, and doesn't get the credit that he deserves. I remember being in New Orleans, actually. We mentioned that Boach Henderson card, and he fought Francisco Rivera. You probably remember the fight lasted 21 seconds, and he contested the stoppage, was super pissed. And one of the hardest part of our jobs is after the fights, we're all at the host hotel, and if you're getting a bite to eat or a drink and you see fighters, it's great seeing the winners, who oftentimes can actually be pretty hard on themselves. You might not believe that. But for the guys who lose fights, having to talk to them after, they've presumably gone back and maybe watched what you've had to say and watched the fight. And I'll never forget being approached by Caceres after that Rivera fight, because he was just so pissed. It was a third straight loss. You wondered about his UFC future, and now, of course, a new year, and he's already won a couple of fights. And I agree with you, man. I really thought he put it all together, and he's got a good frame, obviously, for that division. I think he's finally sort of centered on the right division for him, returning to 145, and we'll see, man. I mean, that top 15 is ruthless, but maybe he can find his way in at some point here.
Oh yeah, that 145 division it's just scary. You Brian Ortega against Clay Guida. Clay Guida literally had that fight in the palm of his hands. Clay was going to come away with a victory, and then Ortega just got that knee and dropped Clay, and my heart sank, because I don't know if there's anyone who does not like Clay Guida.
Yeah, and I think he'll fight on. He's already posting pictures on Instagram working out at the beach and trying to get after it again. But, T-City's a pretty incredible fighter. He's got a lot of different ways that he can beat you, and he's sort of been able to grow up over these past few fights, but also been able to stay undefeated. So, again, just inject another name into that crowded featherweight mix. Ortega, I think, is in the top 10 now and deserves to be there, and has certainly set himself up for a big fight, sometime this summer or fall.
Yeah, he definitely got a bigger name now. And Beneil Dariush came in this fight with James Vick, mate. Wow, yeah, exactly. I was a bit tentative about this. I love Beneil Dariush. Now, obviously, he was pissed about his loss to Caceres, and he said it himself, and that's why he wanted a quick turnaround. So then he ends up getting James Vick, who I was a bit like, well, James Vick is unbeaten. He's big and long. He's a bit of a talent, James Vick. Beneil didn't care. He just took it to James Vick and went, that overhand. Oh my word. Like people are forgetting about that because there was so much on this card. People are like forgetting exceptional moments, and that performance from Beneil, it was just pure anger that just was amazing to watch.
Yeah, you're right, man. I mean, you nailed it. He fought angry. He fought pissed. I remember when Brian Stan fought George Santiago on Memorial Day weekend in Las Vegas, and Stan, as humbly as he can say it, says it was just a bad night to be fighting Brian Stan. Memorial Day weekend, just all the motivation in the world, and this was a bad night to be fighting Beneil Dariush. I mean, certainly smarting after what happened against Michael Chiesa, and then you had the early eye poke, and it's amazing seeing how some guys react after they get poked in the eye. When you think about, as a kid or as an athlete growing up getting poked in the eye, it does make you pissed. And you certainly took it out on James Vick from there. I got a soft spot for all of these Ultimate Fighter Live guys, the only season that I've been a part of and the only live season of the Ultimate Fighter. Of course, Vick was a part of that, eliminated by Michael Chiesa, but he overachieved on that show, and he's been so good in the UFC. This is a tough one. He absorbed a lot of concussive damage. This is a tough one, I think, for him to swallow. And anybody who was closing the book on your boy Beneil Dariush as a contender, I think he proved at the very least that was premature, and that he does have the capability, I think, to make a run back into that top 10.
Yeah, I think Beneil could definitely be a contender, and I think with James Vick, he's still got it's early for him. He's got a lot of time to mature in the sport, and I look forward to seeing James Vick come back, have a bit of time off, come back, and he'll be killing it again. He's such a talent. One fight, Jessica Andrade against Jessica Penne. Now, I met Jessica Andrade in Manchester, and I could not believe how small that girl was for 135 pounds. And that was when she fought Rosie Sexton, who also was going up. She fought 135 Sexton, but she was actually a 125er, but because there was only one weight class, she took up that extra 10 pounds. And I couldn't believe how small Jessica was. I was like, dang, I just couldn't get my head around it. She's at that
I've
weight class.
I've never seen anything like it. You're right. She found the right weight. I mean, did she not put a worse beating on Jessica Penne than the champion did? I mean, it was close.
It was close.
I mean, just everything with fight-ending intentions and just sick power behind every shot. Obviously, she was carrying a little bit of extra weight. You see her at 115 pounds. I mean, she looks the part of strawweight contender. I thought physically she looked great. Even in her face, I just thought she looked healthier and better. And man, she's scary. Obviously has a huge fight coming up, whomever that is against. I was thinking maybe she'd fight someone like Tisha Torres, even though Tisha's coming off a loss. But, dude, mean, must-see TV, right? I mean, you watched her strike, you thought cyborg, you thought, I can't wait to see her against the champion. I mean, did about as much, if not more, with that showcase as she possibly could have.
I said Tisha Torres with a friend of mine as well. We were talking about it the other day. We just kind of went, even though she is, like you say, she's come at a loss, but she just seems like the right kind of matchup. And Jessica is, she's scary and absolutely deadly. But one fight that I couldn't get my head, I was a bit disappointed with, was Poirier versus Green. Green got too much like a Diaz, started doing a bit of the chit chat. I know he does it anyway, but he got a bit too cocky and he kept carrying it on after a couple of cracks. And I think Dustin Poirier is a man on a mission at 155 again, and I just think Bobby Green just made a big mistake in that fight, and it cost him big time.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to talk to Bobby Green, and it'll be interesting. Dustin Poirier, I believe, will be on Brian Stan's radio show coming up tonight. But it's interesting when you fight a guy like Poirier because he is a risk taker, and he is willing to put his chin in harm's way. And I feel like perhaps part of Bobby Green's inner monologue and maybe his strategy is that if I can create sort of a brawl, wild, scrambling, chaotic situation, then I can get Dustin. Obviously, it didn't work out for him, and I think you bring up a lot of good points that maybe his head wasn't completely in the fight the way you'd like to see it be. But yeah, Poirier's a man on a mission, no doubt about it, and you just gotta love his fighting style. Just the fact that he's willing to take risks, and largely that's why a lot of these finishes materialize for fighters like Dustin Poirier, and they don't for other guys, because Poirier is willing to take risks. And Uriah Faber has a Hall of Fame resume, but I guess he was so hurt in that second round against Dominick Cruz that he wasn't willing or able, I don't know which one, to take risks in that fifth round. And a lot of us thought with Faber going into that fight, not to steer the conversation to Faber, but a lot of us thought if there was ever a time that he was going to take risks, it was going to be in this finale trilogy to be completed with Dominick Cruz. Like, let's go. He didn't do that.
No.
Poirier's always willing to do that, and that's why he's a fan favorite.
No, I'm with you on the... We'll go quickly to Faber and Cruz. I'm with you on that one. I just felt that Faber, when he got rocked in a second, he kind of went into his shell and stopped taking risks. And I thought, do you know what? If this is basically, you've had 3 shots already as a title. This is your 4th. Pretty much going to be your last. Let's be brutally honest with him. You've got to go. You've got to do literally kind of what Bisping did and just go for it. You either go out on your shield or you walk out carrying it. And Faber just didn't. I know Dominick Cruz is an absolute nightmare tactically with his movement and stuff like that, but at the same time, you can catch Dominick Cruz, you can catch him, but if you're not going to put the effort in, you're not going to get any reward.
Yeah, and sometimes you wonder what a fighter is thinking in that moment when you see some guys who are down on the scorecards just go into complete desperation mode, and they're super urgent with everything that they throw, and they maybe take some chances with their chin that they wouldn't take if there were different circumstances and they were winning the fight. And same thing with the Frankie Edgar fight. I thought he was just a little bit tentative to pull the trigger. We know he has power. I actually thought going in that he was the guy more likely to get the finish. And I mean, Dominick Cruz is incredible. I mean, there's nothing else you can say about him. No. And obviously he's got a lot of power, man, to put Faber into that type of defensive situation the rest of the fight. But again, I feel like maybe Faber was thinking, look, this is my arch rival. I really don't want to be twitching on the canvas. I'm going to run some clock and just go the distance and suck it up. And I don't know. I just thought this would be one night where he really wouldn't take that approach. But hey, great career, and we'll see if it ends here.
Well, he'll be beating himself up definitely about how he didn't take the risk. We'll quickly touch on Max Holloway and Ricardo Lamas. I had Max Holloway anyway in this fight. I think Holloway is just on another level at the moment. He is riding that wave, and he is doing it in style, Hawaiian style. That man is absolutely amazing to watch. I need him to fight the winner of Aldo and Edgar.
Oh man, he is the Hawaiian fighting spirit personified, is he not? I mean, and when you look at the list of fighters who have won 9 consecutive fights in the UFC, it's a very short list.
Yes.
There's not a lot of guys on that list. What he's been able to do, dating to January of 2014, which was his first fight since going the distance with Conor McGregor, is incredible. Because you look, I mean, he's taken out one top 10 guy after the next, and man, he did everything in his power to get Ricardo Lamas out of there. I have a lot of respect for Ricardo Lamas and his camp, MMA Masters, and thought his stock went up too, just being tough enough to not get finished, given everything that Max was throwing his way. But yeah, man, I mean, if there's an injury to Aldo or Edgar, you got to feel like Holloway would be more than willing and able to step in there. And I think we'd all like to see him in a rematch with Conor McGregor down the line.
Yes.
You know, a lot of us thought Max Holloway was a surefire title contender. And now I think when I see him, I feel like he's a future champion. I really do.
Mate, I'm with you as well. And that ending to that fight was just amazing as well. Just pointing to the ground and standing and banging. Love that bit as well. And Holloway he's so game. I love it. Okay, last fight. Bisping, Rockhold, like we said at the start. It was a fairy tale ending for a career that 10 years in the making. He got his shot at the title. Rockhold, he said it himself after, he didn't take Bisping serious enough because of the last fight they had. And you could see it in there as well. You could see Rockhold you could see the way he was behaving, his body language towards Bisping when Bisping was doing stuff. And it just, do you know what? I think Rockhold was an idiot. I don't understand why fighters are underestimating fighters that may have been beaten before, underestimated it's not that every fight's different. It's look at the previous guys who have underestimated people in big fights. Like Anderson Silva underestimated Weidman and got finished. You can't underestimate anyone at any time.
I'm so with you, and I really can't seem to wrap my head around why Michael Bisping doesn't get the respect he deserves, particularly from some of his peers. You know, when you hear some of the commentary coming out of guys like Chris Weidman and Luke Rockhold, and I think Rockhold at times was respectful in at least acknowledging Bisping's toughness and just his fighting spirit. But man, you're right, he doesn't get enough credit for everything that he's able to do as a striker. And you know, I think for Jason Perillo and Bisping, that's probably their biggest takeaway, is that, you know, here we are, you know, we just beat the consensus greatest of all time a few months ago. 17 days notice or otherwise, you got to keep your hands up and at least protect your chin a little bit. This is a guy who has been striking for, 20 years or so. But the improbability of Michael Bisping finally getting a title shot in his 26th UFC fight, and everything that happened, when he had the momentum and lost that decision to Chael Sonnen when we thought he was going to win it 4 years ago in what was essentially a title eliminator, and then 4.5 years later to put himself in position to take a short notice title opportunity and knock out Luke Rockhold. It's really right up there with Dominick Cruz and what he's done with his adversity, I think, for me, just in terms of, just not destiny necessarily, but just being determined enough and driven enough and having enough, self-starting ability to get yourself over the hump and become a UFC champion. It really is one of the more feel-good stories, I think, in the history of the promotion. Yeah,
that's what I posted a picture on our Instagram saying that, if you ever feel or think about giving up, that is the reason why you don't. Like that picture, I had a picture, it was one of the pictures of Bisping smiling with his belt, walking through the crowd at the end, and that picture was enough because, any other fighter probably just would have eventually just came off, and he just kept going, kept believing, kept going, and it paid off, and it shows that you just can't at any point stop. You've got to keep going until it's the end. Until it is the end, you can't stop because he is the epitome of belief.
Yeah, and I think if you look at everything he's done since the Tim Kennedy fight, which is essentially over the last 2 years, he still maintained the middleweight title aspirations, and every other fight other than the Rockhold one was really a must-win scenario for him.
Yes.
He beat CB Dalloway. Dalloway had a bunch of momentum. Tallis Latis had momentum, when they headlined in Scotland. The Anderson Silva fight obviously speaks for itself, so he never, dismissed the notion that he would be a UFC champion, or at the very least fight for the title, when a lot of us were dismissive of that and just felt like after the Rockhold fight that it just wasn't going to happen. And the fact that it did and then he came through is unbelievable. And, I'm trying to get him on the podcast, and hopefully we'll have him on in a few weeks, because I never even got to congratulate him after the Anderson Silva fight. So that's where I'm going to start. Just congratulate him for that, and then we'll get to the championship. Just really incredible. And even though, he has some naysayers in the UK as well, I think for the region and for Great Britain to have this champion, it's just a really special thing.
It is. It's great. I think it's inspirational. I picked obviously Rockhold in the fight. I think it's not because I didn't believe in Bisping. I just the skill set. I looked at Bisping and Rockhold, and I think I just had Rockhold every day. But Bisping proved us wrong, and I think it's great that he did it. And I'm so inspired by what he did, and I think the UK will have a knock-on effect in the future. I think a lot of fighters, you'll see a lot of people inspired, and it'll bump up the sport a bit more in this country, as even though it's huge anyway. But John, UFC 200, Brock Lesnar, woo! Mark Hunt, good googly moogly, I got no pants on when that fight, because that is, oof.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible how it all came together, and I think, obviously there are a lot of angles at which you can attack it, but the number one takeaway for me is the fact that they're giving Brock Lesnar, a guy who is very much relevant in the heavyweight division.
Yeah.
He's number 8 in the world. He's won 2 fights in a row. The stakes are high to a certain extent here. Were Brock Lesnar to beat Mark Hunt, he can actually lay claim to a potential title shot. I mean, certainly a lot of business is to be decided on September 10th in Cleveland, Ohio, but man, I mean, this is a big fight. Instead of giving him someone maybe like Todd Duffy, who's outside the top 15 looking in and still a striker, they give him Mark Hunt. So to me, it's about as good as they could have done, and I'm really interested to see it play out, man. I thought Lesnar was obviously pretty forthcoming with his interview on SportsCenter as to what he was going to be trying to do in this matchup, but I'm excited, man. And Brock, he won a UFC heavyweight title, he defended it, and then avenged a loss to Frank Mir. I mean, when you look at the body of work, obviously it's short on MMA experience, but the man's accomplished some things, and I think he's worthy of that type of fight, and I'm glad they gave it to him.
And no other heavyweights held the title longer than him. He's still up there with the longest reign of heavyweight title defenses, so he's still got that record up there. He's still a man to look at, even though we've had some great heavyweight champions.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if he beats Mark Hunt or if he loses to Mark Hunt, regardless of what happens on July 9th. Will he fight again in the UFC? Because he did sound yesterday on ESPN like a man who wants to scratch the itch July 9th and then maybe a couple times more. So I'm excited that he's back. For all of us who work for the UFC, certainly it's great that he's back. But as a fight fan, I'm just absolutely captivated by the man and excited to see what Mark Hunt can get going against him.
Right, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. We are finished with our conversation. Sad it's finished because I keep speaking to John forever and a day. But before I let you go, please let everyone know how to do your social media, your podcast links, everything. Just get it all out there.
Well, thanks, man. Obviously, we're doing the Anik and Florian podcast. It's at Anik Florian Pod on Twitter. We try to do it every Monday if at all possible, but we're doing one show a week right now, and much like this show, just a longer format for us to talk about the greatest sport in the world, so I appreciate everyone checking that out. You can find me on Twitter, JON_ANIK, and of course, most Saturday nights you can see me on FS1 or wherever you might be watching around the world, so, we all appreciate the support very much, and hope to see many of you for International Fight Week here in a few weeks.
And I will say, let's hope that Florian starts getting his picks wrong a little bit more and starts losing some more points.
I know, I miss making picks ever since the 209 tattoo. I'm done with making picks. So maybe I'll have you come on and make picks against Ken Flo.
I would happily go against Ken Flo. And do you know what? I didn't even bring up the 209 tattoo. How good am I for that? I was going to avoid that completely.
Yeah, no, and me putting my foot in my mouth bringing it up. But yeah, no, it's hey, I love looking at it every day, and it's funny, every time Nate or Nick says anything, I'm even prouder of this tattoo. I'd like to that I align myself with these guys. They're just very entertaining, and Nick in particular was always he was really the first guy who I sort of would say is my favorite fighter when I got asked that question a million times. So yeah, we got the 209 for life, and proud of it, Johnny.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Jon Anik.